Hi, everyone.
Welcome,
Hello.
welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yes. Oh, holiday vibes?
It's now turned to coffee lounge, everyone, because I started at the end of the song. So. Here we are. Here we are.
All right. Janelle, I see people still kind of trickling in here a little bit.
Yes.
But I do want to be mindful of everyone's time because we do have quite a bit we're going to cover. If you want, we can go ahead and jump over to the slides.
Good to me.
Yeah. All right. Hey, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Definitely feel free to stay off camera. We've got everyone muted right now. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Leeza. We have Janel and Angela with us here today. We're all going to be kind of jumping in and answering questions and supporting you all throughout this presentation. So we do have time slated at the end of the presentation for some Q&A, but definitely feel free to engage in the chat. If you're not driving, be safe, and put your questions in there or, raise your hand. I'm always happy to kind of take questions in the moment as well, if it, feels applicable. Or if you also want to just send messages directly to Angela or Janelle, that's also fine too. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. Welcome everyone. Today's webinar, the name of it's kind of a mouthful, but we're like, how do we really encapsulate what we're going to be talking about today? Today's presentation is called K12 Insider Insights, a blueprint for impactful industry support. And so my name is Leeza Woodbury for any of us that have not met yet before. I am a dietitian and the owner of Nourish Partners here. We got our little crew from Nourish Partners. And I am a former menu planner, former food service director turned consultant. So I've been in the school food space, I think about 12 years at this point, kind of moved my way along into a few different roles. So I like to kind of give that insight so that you can understand the perspective that I'm bringing to the table with this presentation. Angela and Janelle also have experience in the school food space in different capacities. So we like to bring that to our presentation so that you all can learn from your customer. So we always like to say that information provided in our trainings and webinars is based on general federal guidelines. Like school meal programs are federally regulated, and we like to bring our own best practices from working in the field and working alongside as your current customer and alongside your other current customers to bring you that insight. However, I will say, because this presentation is available nationally, it is important to ask the state agency or your supervisor or someone on your team if you have questions specific to your state, because each state can kind of do things a little bit differently. So we do like to kind of have that disclaimer at the front. So what are the objectives for today's training? Really, we have two key objectives, but underneath these umbrellas, there's a lot of information that we're really packing into this webinar. So the first thing we're going to be making sure we cover is understanding federal school meal program basics, just meal program kind of 101 foundational level, going through terms and understanding how it all kind of scaffolds and builds on each other, and then identifying additional ways that you as K12 industry members can support your customers outside of the traditional sales call or things like that. So what we're presenting today, based on your experience in school food and how long you've been here, maybe different roles you've held, the information may be a refresher or it could be completely brand new to you. Either way is totally fine. We're here to support everyone and where you are in your K12 journey and where you are with your learning in the space. So we're going to dive right into the meat and potatoes of this and just jump right into child nutrition programs, like bare bones, like basics. What is it? Child nutrition programs has lots of acronyms for any of you that have been in the school food space for any period of time. And so just like that, child nutrition programs also has several different names that I might refer to throughout this presentation. So I could refer to it as federal meal program, school nutrition. There's so many other ways we can refer to it, but we're all referring to the same thing here. So within those federal meal programs, there's different types of child nutrition programs. And so we have the 5 most common ones listed here. So we have school breakfast program, which is the traditional breakfast program. We have the National School Lunch Program, which is NSLP. I see we're getting back to our slides. That's fine. I'll keep talking.
I'm so sorry. I went to click and it clicked us to the very back. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and reshare, okay?
No problem. Thank you, Angela. We have the National School Lunch Program, which is your traditional lunch program, seamless summer and summer food service programs, which are 2 types of summer federal programs that are available, and then the CACFP or Child and Adult Care Food Program. So we're not going to dive very deeply into all of these in this webinar because it's just not feasible to talk about all of those in a 45-minute to an hour presentation. But I wanted to just go ahead and put those acronyms out there so that you can kind of be familiar with what we're going to be talking about in this presentation. So within the USDA child nutrition programs, it's important to note that these programs are regulated at the federal level, they're administered at the state level, and they're also audited at the state level. So while we're having to follow these federal regulations, we also have to abide by state level, administration, and there could be more strict rules within different states. A great example is California. There's definitely some more strict regulations in California than there might be in some other states. So just important to note. So when we talk about these federal school meal programs, it's important to think about how your customer gets paid. And I just want to have the caveat here. This is like oversimplification, but just bare bones. This is how your customers get paid. So the first thing that they have to do is they have to serve food to students, and it has to be reimbursable meals. And they're recording basically how many reimbursable meals they serve each day at each school within their district. To level up, then they have to think about student eligibility. There are caveats to this if there's universal feeding potentially or community eligibility provisions. But big picture, they're thinking about student eligibility and the categories of free, reduced, and paid. So these 2 things combined give us the total amount that's paid to the district based on the reimbursement rates. So big picture, they serve food to students. It's got to be compliant. It's got to be reimbursable. They're serving those meals to students within the school district, potentially in different eligibility categories. They report all of that information to the state agency, and then they get reimbursement based off of those meals. So as you can see, the foods that are served to the students are important, one for nourishing the students, but also it is literally the basis of their funding and making sure that the foods and the meals that they serve are compliant. So that's going to lead me directly into reimbursable meals, because I mentioned it on the last slide, and I think it's important to know what is a reimbursable meal. So a reimbursable meal is basically a meal that meets specific requirements that contributes to the cafeteria's funding. So basically, it's planning your menus and your items within the tray based on age or grade groups for the students that you're serving, within the confines of daily and weekly minimum amounts of the different food groups you're serving, and while abiding by nutrition-specific requirements. Now, if that feels like a lot, it is. And your schools are really working really hard to plan menus that are compliant, that the kids will eat, that are cost effective. There's so many factors, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in this presentation, is all those factors from your customer's perspective, that they consider in this menu planning process that's actually quite complicated. So why is it important for you all as industry members to be familiar with reimbursable meals? Because, I get it. You're not the one serving the meals to the kids or running the cashier or submitting the claims. Well, it's really important for the K12 industry side to understand reimbursable meals, meal pattern, and menu planning, because this directly impacts your customers' funding, and it impacts how much money they have to spend on the foods that they're purchasing from you all, or that they're sampling. The reimbursable meals also can directly impact the design and physical meal service of your customers. And we're going to touch on this in a few slides to kind of drive home this point. It also is important for you to be familiar with reimbursable meals because it helps you provide viable solutions to your customers and help you support them with any roadblocks or challenges that they're facing. But it also helps you on the industry side come up with those creative solutions to those roadblocks so that you can still support your customer. And lastly, and I feel like this is not an all-encompassing list, but the big ones is it helps you better support your customers by bringing additional value, which we're going to be touching on later in the presentation. But most importantly, reimbursable meals is how your customers get paid. This is how they run their programs. This is how they pay for the food that they're purchasing from the industry. So basically, industry is pitching the food, the supplies, or the products that go onto those school menus. And that's why it's helpful for you all to understand basic menu planning. And today we're really going to be giving you that insider perspective from menu planners, directors, culinary experts like Janel, who does recipe development, and understanding the thought process that goes into putting together the complicated puzzle that is menus and meal planning. So basically, it's a win-win for everyone to be up to speed on the current regulations for the federal meal programs, because it helps you all target specific products to meet your specific schools and your specific customers and to meet their needs and what they're looking for. It's ultimately going to save time and money with samples so that you're pitching products to the customers that are most useful to them based on their goals for their program, the needs and their operations of their actual programs within their districts or their schools. So it's going to help save time and energy and effort, and it's going to help build trust and rapport with your customer because they'll see that you understand, the impact of, a supply chain issue or of a substitution or swapping out a product on a menu is not so simple in a lot of cases. And ultimately, we're here to nourish the students. And so by providing foods and solutions to the menu planners and the directors and your customers, ultimately helps us get foods on menus that the kids are able to eat and that they want to eat. So let's talk a little bit about menu specifics before we dive into the actual meal pattern regulations. And what I'm going to talk about here is mostly understanding the operational things, for lack of a better word, that impact your customer and things that they need to think about and consider before they even put a food on their menu, before they even consider a new product. And these are going to be things like, are they on a cycle menu? Do they have a rotation every 4 weeks? And they're already in, week 4 of their rotation and they don't add new products on their menu until the end of the next cycle. There could be these timeline factors that really play into understanding the specifics of your customer's menu. It could also be impacted by the number of daily entrees they offer. Some schools I've seen have, 10, 15, 20 entree options available to students, and some just have one, and then maybe a vegetarian alternative. Really, really depends on the customer. It's also important for your customer to consider, and for you as well, to consider if they have a la carte programs, salad bars, if they have specialized serving stations that maybe have themes, considering if there's any self-serve options for the students or even vending machines. So all of these options available within schools can impact the meal service style that your customer operates. So it's important to note that every district operates differently, and we're really going to zoom in on this in a little bit. But even the meal service styles within a district can be different. So it's important to understand your customers' meal service styles as well, because that's what's going to help you think about the products that can really fit on their menus. So whether there's scratch cooking, speed scratch, heat and serve, maybe it's a small charter school that relies on vended meals from an outside food vendor or uses an FSMC company to run their kitchens. Maybe they have capacity for a central kitchen in large warehouses. And then also thinking about the service of where those meals are served to the students. So whether it's inside the cafeteria, outside the cafeteria, like the classroom, and thinking about where those students eat. Do they eat outside? Are there food trucks with picnic tables outside? Or is there an open campus that the students, there's competition where the students can go across the street and get food from, another vendor essentially. So we're gonna go one more slide, please. The menu specifics and the menus that your customers are planning should also represent what the students eat. So we talked about the fact that the schools basically don't get reimbursement unless the meals are served to the students. So, and that kind of means that the students are coming into the cafeteria to get the food. So we want to support the students and nourish them by providing foods that they want to eat, whether it's thinking about taste and flavor preferences, thinking about cultures, traditions, different religions within the community for the schools or school district, supporting students with medical conditions, and considering holidays throughout the year that can impact the students and their engagement within the school cafeteria. And I feel like I'm layering on, but there's so many things to consider when it comes to menu planning. We also need to make sure that we're putting a focus on introducing a variety of flavors and textures to the students. Now, sometimes new foods are scary for students. I was an extremely picky eater as a kid, and I can guarantee you I might not have tasted some of these foods on this menu, even though they look delicious. But I feel like, as a menu planner, as a director, it is important for us to introduce a variety of flavors and textures onto the menus to expose the students to, maybe other cultures that are within the school district, other flavor profiles, and affording them the opportunity to try foods that maybe they're not accessing at home. So when we're thinking about these menu specifics, it is important to get to know your customer. And I think everyone here on this call can really relate to this. The school food space is very relationship based. And so that's a really important factor, but it's also important to get to know your customer kind of on the operational level so that you can understand about their programs and their needs and their priorities. So some things that you could think about when you're getting to know your customer, whether it's someone that you have known for decades or it's someone that is brand new to their role, is thinking about how much of their student population requires meal modifications. Is that something that's they have a large population or a growing population of students that are needing these meal modifications that is actually shifting the needs of the district to support those students? Also thinking about how your products can provide more options for their students' wants and needs. And lastly, thinking about how your products can make the menu planner's life easier. We're going to talk about value add later in the presentation, but this is a really important note that I like to talk about, especially within our work within Nourish Partners, is bringing the additional value to make the products plug and play for your customer, because menu planning and changes to menus can be very cumbersome. Okay, so we're kind of scaffolding the conversation here. And so now I want to kind of go back to a foundational concept here and talk about meal components. Okay, so we've talked about reimbursable meals. We've talked about, operational things within your customers' districts and operations. But now I want to talk about meal components and how this really ties into industry's role from your customer's perspective. So what are meal components? Meal components, this is a term for the federal meal program. It's basically like the food groups, but specific to school meals. So the 5 meal components within the school meal program are grains, meat alternate, fruits and vegetables, and fluid milk. I like to say, well, actually, I learned this from Angela, so I'm not going to take the credit. Calling it fluid milk as opposed to, dairy or just milk, really clarifying that the fluid milk is that drinking milk, and that is what this component is specifically referring to, just to kind of clarify that one. So when we think about the meal components or the 5, food groups within school food, it's important, super duper important for your customer for crediting components within the meal pattern. Okay, so we're just going to scaffold up here. Meal components are the food groups. So we need to then shift our focus to crediting these components. So why is crediting so incredibly important to your customer? Well, the crediting is essentially the serving or portion size that's directly connected to those meal components within their menus for age and grade groups. And I feel like that was a mouthful. But basically, your customers are planning menus based off of the age or grade groups within their school setting. So like K through 5 or 6 through 8. And the meal patterns dictate the servings and portion sizes, amounts of, those 5 food components, grains, meat, alternate, fruit, vegetables, and fluid milk, that they are required to offer to those students. So the crediting is just like a critical piece. And so I want to walk you through just a really simple example of crediting to kind of drive home this point and where I'm coming from. And we chose pizza because I can pretty much guarantee you pizza is on like 90% of school menus across the nation. So we're like, what is like super relatable? So when we think about pizza, as a menu planner, I think so many things about this. First of all, it's delicious. But second of all, I'm thinking about the different components within the actual slice of pizza that I'm serving the students. So when we think about a pizza in terms of components, we're thinking about those 5 different components or 5 different food groups. So within this slice, and without having the specs or, product formulation statement or anything, these are assumptions, but the crust on the pizza is likely crediting as a grain. And so that's a component. It's crediting as a grain. Now, the cheese on the pizza is likely crediting as a meat alternate. So that's another one of those food components. And the turkey pepperoni on this slice could potentially credit as a meat alternate. Again, these are all things that we're reliant as the customer, as the district, as the menu planner, on the documentation provided by the manufacturers, such as the CN label or PFS statement, so that we can know exactly what this slice of pizza credits as for the different components and then for the different portion sizes, so that we can kind of go down our waterfall of thoughts that we think about when we're like, does this slice of pizza work on my menu? Now, that kind of the next level up from that is we talked about the credit component, the component crediting. So it likely credits as a grain and a meat alternate. But the next level up from there that we would be reliant on industry to provide would be the actual crediting. So for example, this slice of pizza served to a student credits as 2 ounce equivalent grain and 2 ounce equivalent meat alternate. This information tells me, tells me so much. This lets me know this is a great opportunity for high school. It's a great opportunity for middle school. It's a great opportunity for elementary school. If this had said, 1 ounce equivalent grain and 1 ounce equivalent meat alternate, in my mind, might not be the best fit for high school, but could be a great alternative for maybe elementary school or some sort of after school program. So the crediting really plays a huge role in the customer when they're thinking about those menus. So let's jump over to the meal pattern. And the meal pattern is based on these age or grade groups that I've kind of talked about several times to this point. So we're going to focus in on grade groups just for the purpose of this presentation. Again, I could literally talk for like 12 hours about this because there's so much to cover and to know about the regulations. But it's important to note that depending on which federal program your customers are operating, they may need to think about their menu planning and meal patterns in terms of age groups. So like physical ages of students, like age 6 to 18, which is correlated to the CACFP program, or for the more traditional breakfast and lunch programs, they think in terms of grade groups. So again, K through 5, 6 through 8, maybe a blend, K through 8, K through 12. And that's what those meal patterns are really based on. So we talked about meal components. So those 5 meal components or 5 food groups are what fit into the bigger picture, which is the meal pattern. So again, we have the grain, meat alternate, fruits, vegetables, and fluid milk. And then within the meal pattern, your menu planner, your customer is really having to consider, federally speaking, like this is the federal regulations, there's daily and weekly minimums that they have to offer to the different grade groups for the different components for the different federal meal programs that they're operating. And this is such a weird little caveat with this second bullet point. When you look at the meal pattern regulations, there are maximums that are listed, but those are actually no longer in effect, but they're still written into the regulation. So your customer is thinking about the meal components, the food groups, and how they're fitting into the bigger picture of the meal pattern. They're thinking about the different grade groups that they're serving, and they're also thinking about weekly averages for nutrition content. And it's important to note that your customer is thinking about calories, sodium, saturated fat, which we didn't include on this slide, and added sugar. I'll talk about added sugar here in just a second. And I think this is one question that I get most often when it comes to, providing menu inspiration and recipe development to industry partners is, I get asked actually probably more often than I'm estimating at this point, but I get asked on a very regular basis, how many calories does my product need to be? Or like we might be doing recipe development and how many calories does this recipe need to be? Well, the answer is usually it depends, because it really depends on your customer's menu and what they menu over the course of an entire week. The nice thing about this is that it allows flexibility for your customer to put items on their menus that may be higher in calories and maybe higher in sodium and fat, counterbalanced with items that may be lower in calories, fat, and sodium. So it gives them that flexibility when they're planning their menus. So it's less about the individual product's nutrition content than it is about how that product is plugged into the menu over the course of the week. Now, the hot topic right now really is added sugars. And on the previous slide, there's a weekly added sugar requirement that is not taking effect until July 1 of 2027. However, there is a more immediate added sugar requirement that's coming for July 1 of 2025, so the start of this coming school year. So as your customers start to gear up and, maybe after winter break, they start thinking about their bids and their menus and their commodity orders, USDA foods, those types of things, this is something that will be considered for these product-based added sugar limits starting for July 1 of next school year. It's important to note that the added sugar limits for this upcoming school year only impact added sugars in breakfast cereals, yogurt, and flavored milk. Schools can voluntarily choose to start decreasing the added sugar in their menus outside of these three categories, and that's totally at their discretion. However, that is not a requirement until July 1 of 2027. So just wanted to throw that in there. So basically what I'm trying to get at is that your customers are menu magicians. It is phenomenal what menu planners do on a daily basis. And so we just wanted to give you a visual here for a sample 9 through 12 lunch menu, thinking about the nutrition content averaged over the course of the week. You may be thinking, oh, a barbecue sandwich or tikka masala seems, maybe really high in sodium, but they're able to balance the sodium and the fat and the calories over the course of the week with different types of meal components on their menus. So I'm going to kind of stop the meal pattern talk right there, because I could literally talk about meal patterns for hours and hours. So we do have Spork University available that goes into meal pattern regulations very in depth, like really in depth. It's so helpful, but it does cover the USDA final rule changes and understanding and digesting all of that information to understand, what's happening now and what's coming down the road. So as we think about the meal pattern, the menu planning, the next thing we need to talk about is the customer itself. And, thinking about what is our why when we work in the K-12 industry, because this really impacts, your customers' goals and, needs within their department. And so I think I can likely speak for, most, if not everyone on this call, that our why for working in the K-12 space, we're here to nourish the students. We're here to provide them with delicious and nutritious foods that they're going to eat, that's going to help reduce food insecurity and allow the students to have access to food during the school day. It allows us to impact the health of the students in a positive way. It allows us to get all the delicious products that all of you represent and support onto the school menus and into the mouths and the hands of the students, while also supporting our colleagues and peers in the school nutrition space as we all navigate these regulations together. While we really spend a lot of our time trying to digest and understand new regulations and things that come out, we're all in this together. We're all learning new regulations together. And so it really takes us all supporting one another to help with digesting that information. So as we think about the customer, most immediately, I think probably the director and the menu planner comes to mind. But we also need to think about the indirect customers that you all have an impact on, but then also the customers of your customer. So the director and the menu planner does need to be responsive and responsible to the district level staff, whether this is the administration, maybe it's the CBO or superintendent, maybe it's the principals at the different sites, making sure that they're able to support those customers in having the most efficient and effective meal program on the different sites throughout the campus within the needs and the challenges that each school site can offer. We also need to consider the parents, guardians, and caregivers of the students. These are also our customers on the industry side, but also as a menu planner and director, especially for younger students, the parents and guardians can have a lot of input into, the days that maybe students eat in the cafeteria versus bring a lunch from home, or, if they feel safe sending their student to eat a meal at school due to medical conditions or allergies. And then, of course, the big picture customer really is the student, because we want to nourish the student. We want to provide them with these delicious foods, and we want them to feel safe and supported within the school meal program environment. So as we hone in on your customer of, the director, the menu planner, and I'm really using those terms loosely because I know every district is different. Sometimes the food service director is the CBO of a small district. So know that this is kind of an all-encompassing term. It's easy to default and think that your customer is always just thinking about the food on the menu. And it's so interesting, when I got into school food service as a dietitian, I realized that some days, like, I almost didn't even think or talk about food. Even though the menu is such a huge piece of the program, there's so much operational and administrative things that really come into play with your customer. And so your customer is not just juggling one ball and the menu. They are thinking about audits, all the government regulations, all the changes that are coming. Like, we just heard about a potential food allergy law that we're trying to understand and see how that's going to impact things. They're thinking about budget. They're thinking about staffing, human resources, making sure new people are onboarded and trained, all while trying to make sure that they're meeting that critical common goal of nourishing the students. So while we know the menu is a huge piece of this puzzle, it's just one piece of it. But industry, the K12 side, is also involved in more than just the menu. Yes, you all provide the food and everything, but you do have an indirect impact on all of these things as well. The foods and the documentation that you provide has a direct impact on audits and reviews, having correct PFS documents and spec sheets available to the customer that they have to submit to their auditors, making sure that your products are compliant with government regulations or meeting, trends or upcoming regulations. You impact the budget with, the pricing of the products that's offered, while at the same time, your customer kind of finding that balance to make sure that foods fit within their budget. The information provided can also impact staff training as well. When new products are introduced on menus, your customer is needing to train the staff on how to prepare those products. So if there's additional value that you can bring on how to prepare those products in different types of equipment, or best practices, maybe it should be thawed overnight the day before they serve it, those different things actually can impact the staff's capabilities to serve those products in the best way. And obviously nourishing the students by providing these foods that are available for the menus. So, big picture, we just talked about kind of who is the customer and what is your customer, dealing with and thinking about on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. We also need to think about the customer kind of through the lens of the district, I say the district, it could be the school, understanding, there may be single site charters out there or something, but each district is different. And even within a district that has multiple sites, individual schools within the district can be different from each other as well. And when we think about how different these districts are and how different these customers are, we should consider different factors like the actual locality and setting of the district, urban, suburban, rural, thinking about the economic health of the local community and the ethnic and cultural makeup of both the students and the staff. It's really important to make sure that we're considering the big picture of the school and district environment as a whole, because the menus impact everyone within the organization, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. But districts and school sizes can also vary widely. I mean, there could be a school that's got 1,200 kids. I feel like that's pretty common for high schools these days. Whereas you might have an elementary school the other day that I spoke to that had 40 students in the entire school. And so just knowing that there's differences between the districts that we're serving, and knowing that the states can have different policies that impact the districts. There could be different board policies or local policies that impact the districts for their health inspections. And then also local foods and regional foods. I feel like there's been a really big push for that across the nation. And some communities may not have access to those local foods, or they could be much more expensive, due to location. So it's important to think about the differences between the districts and really understand that those factors also play a role into your customers' menus. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that all of these factors dictate why or how your customer may put certain products on their menus or why they may not. So I want to give you a nice little visual here. I'm going to thank Angela for this one. She's always good with the visuals and the graphics. So we have a school district, okay? And the school district has 3 schools. So when we think about the differences between a district, maybe school A offers the traditional breakfast and lunch program and a supper program, and school B operates breakfast and lunch, but they do snack after school because of their after school programming. And then maybe the third school doesn't do any after school programming. The thing to consider with this is, maybe you have a product that is just like the perfect fit for a supper program. Maybe it fits into other programs, but you're like, oh man, people really love this product for supper. And you go and you talk to the school district about this amazing supper item. And, thinking about potential for sales, size of the district, participation, all that kind of stuff. This district, in this example, only operates supper at one school. So that is important to note that, every school within a district may and probably likely is operating different programs. Now, I will say most schools are operating their traditional breakfast program and traditional lunch program, but those after school programs can vary widely. So to kind of drill down on this example as well, if we're thinking about the same district with the same schools, they could also have different facilities and operations within those schools, in addition to operating different federal programs. Now, within those different federal programs, every federal program has its own meal pattern and its own requirements for meal components. It has its own requirements for nutrition. It has its own requirements for the portion sizes for the different grade groups within that school. And then you throw in all these complex differences between the schools within a district. So school A that's operating breakfast, lunch, and supper has a central kitchen. They have a large receiving, warehouse and freezer, and they have the capacity to order food well in advance. While school B and C may be reliant on receiving food from the central kitchen. Maybe school B only has equipment to do heat and serve style, while the central kitchen is doing scratch cooking or fast scratch. Maybe school C, based on their facility, only has the ability to use individually wrapped products. They can't have anything exposed or open. So thinking about how every customer is different in learning about your customer in different ways so that you can best support them with the products that you offer, I feel like is really the point that I'm getting to here. So we're going to shift into talking about meal program priorities from the director's perspective. So when we think about meal program priorities, we need to follow all the regulations. Like that has to happen because our funding is contingent on it. We also have to make sure that we're keeping all partners happy. So that customer kind of pyramid that we put together, making sure that the food offerings and availability are making all the customers happy, from the students to the parents to the administration. We're also focusing in and making sure that we're training and retaining staff. Staffing is a huge issue, especially in the last several years. Making sure that kitchens are well staffed to the point that they can support the operations of the kitchen. Maybe they don't have, enough staff to actually implement fast scratch or scratch cooking. So therefore, they are in a place of using heat and serve products. Also thinking about additional administrative burdens. And then the funny thing about school food is that you're supposed to make money to cover your expenses, but you also can't make too much money because you can't have too much money in your reserve or else you're put on a spending plan. So when your customer is thinking big picture about those meal program priorities, there's so many factors that all go into directly, decisions that are impacting those menus as we're planning it. And so all of this to say, changing the menu changes everything. And we're kind of alluding to the fact that the guy in yellow is a menu change. It just like chaos ensues. Changing a product on the menu, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, there's implications. There's potential training for staff at the sites. There's potential changes in deliveries and how far in advance you receive those deliveries. There's changes in recipes within the nutrition analysis software. There's changes in order guides with distributors. Like there's so many things. And then especially if these menu changes are unforeseen and not planned for, like supply chain or substitutions. Making these changes within a very short period of time to ensure compliance so that you can still get your funding. It's welcome to the life of a director and a menu planner. Man, it's such a great job. I love it. Okay, so we talked about meal program priorities. So if we dive into menu development priorities, I want to kind of give you this from the director and menu planner perspective. So when we're developing these menus, we're thinking about the compliance, we're thinking about the funding, we're thinking about the cost and all that stuff, but we're also thinking about student acceptance. Student acceptance is vital. As I mentioned, your customer's not getting reimbursed for meals unless the students come in and get it, and unless they're serving those reimbursable meals. And so taking into consideration if the students will accept a product on their menu, is it familiar? Does it look, taste, or smell good? Is it something they're going to eat on a regular basis? And trends in the past can impact your customers' decisions if they think a customer is going to accept this. Now, they may be doing taste tests to understand, if different ages like it, or it could be something where, maybe a customer had a certain type of burrito on their menu and it just failed miserably. So they're just of the mindset that the kids don't like burritos. And so using these opportunities with your products of, if you represent a burrito, how can you bring the value to help your customer understand how your product can bring in participation in their kitchens? So I like to say, and I don't know if I heard this from someone, so we'll put unknown at the bottom because I don't want to take credit for it, but something that I always say is food is not nutrition until a student eats it. We can plan the most beautiful menu with the most nutritious foods, but if the kids are not coming into the cafeteria and if they're not eating it, they're not gaining the benefit of what we're preparing for them. So another perspective we need to consider of your customers when they're making these menus is, does it meet the meal pattern? Is it compliant with the components, the crediting, the standardized recipes, the nutrition content, the documentation piece, and thinking about how substitutes can impact staff training at the site level. Meal patterns are complex. Somehow they're summarized into a nice little chart, but once you start putting together the pieces of the puzzle, you're like, oh boy, this is a lot. So the next perspective to consider is the cost. And, this is also a question that I get quite often as well, is like, well, what dollar amount will directors pay for this type of item? It's like, well, you got to think about food over the course of the week, balancing lower cost, or commodity items with more expensive items. And really thinking about, again, that kind of saying that I said is like, programs need to make money. They need to cover their costs, but they can't make too much money. And then also balancing that with food costs, and then also thinking about food costs of substitutions and different changes in labor rates and unions. And there's so many things that that play into the budget that sometimes are not in our control as a director or menu planner. So the next perspective we want to consider is product availability. And I know this is kind of a pain point for a lot of people just in the food industry in general. But when your customer is thinking about their menus, they are thinking about different factors. I mean, you all know they're thinking about lead time. When can I get this product? Can I get it in time for the date that I've planned it on my menu? Is it in stock, at a distributor or for local distribution? Or direct distribution? Do I have it in stock in my warehouse? Are there minimum orders? Are there special orders? Is it a seasonally available product? So all these things can shape and change the menu that you may have already decided that you wanted to serve. And then the next perspective we want to talk about is storage capacity. So really thinking about your facilities when you're planning these menus. Do you have the actual storage space to bring in a pallet of this product? Do you have current inventory of a similar product that you need to use up before you can bring in, a different brand? Do you have warehousing space? And this is all different for every school within a district and from district to district. And so the next thing we want to consider is ease of implementation. So I'm just going to give a little anecdote here, and I know we're running close to time here, and there's a lot of information to cover, but when we're thinking of ease of implementation as a menu planner, as a director, we need to think about the actual sites and how they are physically preparing and serving this food to the students. And I know at the very beginning of my career as a menu planner, I made the mistake of planning a menu that had too much scooping, and I didn't realize it. Sitting behind a computer planning a menu, not being frontline staff. And the feedback I got from the staff was it was too much scooping, because the way that this specific school was set up, they had to scoop and serve everything live. And they're trying to crank through, 300-400 kids. They're scooping orange chicken, they're scooping brown rice, they're scooping vegetables. So thinking about the ease of implementation of menu items into your menus is a factor that your customer is considering. So then the next thing we want to consider is the current staff skills and capacity. And this really just has to do with the level of training that has been provided to the staff by the district, or the level of experience that they come into this role with. Do they have, specific culinary experience like knife skills or handling raw meat or different things like that? But then also thinking about the actual staffing at the different site levels to make sure that there's enough labor on site to actually implement the menu items that you want to use. And there's a lot more. So if you want to learn more, again, we don't have time in here, but we do cover this in Spork University, just to really dive into the customer's perspective on a deeper level. So as we kind of round out this presentation here, I want to talk to you about 3 things that I encourage you to learn about your customer. The first thing I encourage you to learn about your customer is their menus. More specifically, who plans the menus, knowing that not every district has a registered dietitian, not every district, has a nutritionist or someone. Sometimes it is the director who is planning the menus on top of all of the other roles and responsibilities that they have. And then how often are their menus planned? Do they do it for the whole year? Is it quarterly, monthly? This can impact when new items are actually added onto the menu. So understanding the customer's menu cycles or kind of their thought process with those is super important. And then lastly, what is the menu planner's specific needs? Do they have certain needs that they're trying to fill? Do they have a lot of requests for halal due to their student population? Do they need vegetarian options on their menu every day because their students are just asking for it? So leaning into learning about what are your customers' needs for their menus. Now, the second thing I encourage you to learn about your customer is their meal service. And this is a big ask. And honestly, you need to think about the capacity of your customer if they even have time to explain all of this to you. But I think even just like planting the seed that you want to learn these things about your customers, which in turn will help you understand which types of products will really fit best onto their menus. How are their kitchens and serving lines set up? What style of service do they use? Are they scratch cooking? Are they heat and serve? Are they looking to dabble in scratch cooking in the future? Maybe you could get a tour so that you can really get that like tangible on-site visual of how their program is operating. Or could you host a roundtable with maybe their key kitchen staff that have input in menus to get feedback if they think your products could be viable for their menus, and why or why not? And then you can help support the roadblocks and challenges if it's a good fit for their program. Now, the third and final thing that I encourage you to learn about your customer is your customer's style and needs. I think we all know every customer is totally different. Do they prefer paper or electronic sales sheets or PDFs? Angela and I were actually just joking the other day when we were both mini planners. We both had a spec sheet binder. It was like, I don't even know if it was a huge binder, constantly printing and rotating out PFS. It was very cumbersome to find things. I much prefer electronic these days, but every customer is totally different. So working within their style and their needs, that's going to be most supportive to them can be really helpful and just kind of level up and bring that value add to them. But then also thinking about, do they need recipes or ideas for new products, and how can you help them visualize and brainstorm how your products can fit into their menus? And then thinking about, do they need taste testings in different capacities for staff or students? And then lastly, learning about their short and long-term goals. Like I mentioned, are they applying for a grant that's going to help them move towards scratch cooking in 2 school years? Or do they really want to lean into the added sugar requirement that's coming down the road and really make these changes to their programs? So we do talk about more tips in Spork University, but I really want to leave you with some key takeaways from this presentation. And I know I talk a lot and I talk really fast. So I want to give you a nice little summary. If you haven't been listening at all, I hope you can take this away. Every district is different. Every customer is different. And asking open-ended questions to learn about their programs is just going to help you more in your role in the industry space. Multiple factors go into product placement on menus. As we've talked about, literally this entire presentation has kind of been like everything your customer is thinking about. But understanding meal program basics from the K-12 industry perspective can help increase customer support, trust, and it adds value to your role in the K-12 space. So if you like what you learned, I know I've thrown Spork University in here quite a bit. We do have a deal for 50% off for Spork University. And it's a really great opportunity to get 16 hours of content to basically go into detail about everything that we just talked about. But some ways that Spork University can be utilized is really as an orientation for people that are new to the K-12 space, help you lean in and learn about those USDA final rules and how your customers are thinking about them. But then lastly, thinking about those value adds that you can offer to your customers from the perspective of your customers. So we have the QR code here, and we also do have a PFS course. And I wanted to be sure to talk about this here because especially those that are new to the industry, or as product redevelopment happens to meet these new regulations of added sugar, of other things that are coming down the road, like, potential sodium in several years. We do have a course that actually tells you how to do a PFS. So I just wanted to plant that right there for you. But other things that we can do to support the K-12 industry really can come down to providing this inspiration and this value add for your customer. So I think it's really important to make sure that bringing that additional value to the customer is only going to strengthen your relationship and your placement within the K-12 space. So here's our little team here. But what I wanted to leave you all with here is I want to ask you a poll, and I don't know, is it going to pop up?
I got you.
I want to ask, it should, okay. So I want to ask you all as industry folks to complete this poll, because we're working on future webinars like this. And I want to make sure that the presentations that we're developing and we're creating for the industry are actually aligning with what you all want to learn about. So if you could fill out this poll, I would love to learn. These are some ideas that we initially thought of. We thought of a webinar for added sugars, talking about the Buy American that's coming as well, USDA final rule, just meal pattern in general. One idea I had, and I'm like, I don't even know if anyone would want this, but like watch a menu planner create a menu. So like I can give Angela like 10 products and be like, here, plan a menu. And then she can like talk through, I don't know. I want to come up with opportunities and trainings that will be useful and really help you all understand, from the customer's perspective, And then another idea we had was tips for new brands, or if there's anything else that you think of that would be super helpful. We're working on developing webinars for January through June. So again, if you could please complete this poll, I would love to see what you all are interested in learning about. So for any of you that have an SNS credential and need to get some training hours, these are the key areas that you can use to track for this webinar. We can also provide you with a certificate. Angela, I don't know if you want to put your email in the chat, or you can put mine. If you want to email us, we can send you a training certificate as well that has this information for your annual training hours. And so there's lots of ways that you can keep in touch with us. We do have Instagram and LinkedIn. If you just kind of want to see, you know, the cool things we're coming out with, or different ways that we can partner, collaborate. And oh my gosh, we have so much going on in December. We have a free giveaway. If you want to win a salad bowl, you can enter on social media for that as well. Gosh, we're doing a lot over here. Okay, so thank you guys so much for attending. I do want to open it up. I know we're kind of running up against the hour, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to open the line and see how we can support you all.
Yeah, Leeza, there's a quick question here in the chat, or maybe it's a suggestion for another webinar, how to get items on a bid and where can I find a bid that has been awarded. So if you want to touch on that, and I think that's another awesome idea for a webinar.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I feel like that could be a really great collaboration with some other industry partners. The cost of joining your webinar. So our webinars like this are free. We're not charging for these. We just want to support you all. But yeah, how to get items on a bid. You know, I recently learned this is not a customer of ours or a client of ours. Like this is just, I learned about a company called Interflex recently that kind of consolidates bid information. So I strongly recommend reaching out to them as an industry partner, maybe to get a demo. But they basically consolidate bid information, bids that have been awarded, line items that got onto those bids. It's kind of gnarly, the information that they've got available. All right, any other questions?
All that's come through the chat so far, but now's your time, everybody. If you have any more burning questions, you can always email us. I know I'm also someone that I'll walk away and in 15 minutes, I'll be like, oh man, I should have asked this. So if you're like me, feel free to email us.
Same, likewise. All right. Do you spell that as Interflex? Yes, that's exactly how it's spelled. I think it's interflex.net. But if you also want a connection, I know a representative that I've spoken to in the past, feel free, you can email Angela on the screen and can make a connection. Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll hang out for a couple more minutes if anyone has any questions, but thank you all for attending. We hope to see you in future webinars. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you.